What if I told you that the decisions of one man in the 11th century would set the course for centuries of conflict and cultural exchange? Yes, I'm talking about Pope Urban II and the First Crusade. The First Crusade, a monumental event that spanned from 1096 to 1099, was largely a response to several interwoven factors. At the forefront was the Roman Church's desire to expand its influence eastwards and establish moral and political dominance over Europe. Simultaneously, the pilgrimage to Jerusalem, a sacred obligation for Christians, was increasingly hampered by Muslim rule, stirring up resentment and a desire for action. Coupled with these was the emergence of the chivalric ideal in Europe, a concept that saw knights yearn for adventure and wealth. All these factors coalesced in 1096 when Pope Urban II issued a call to arms, appealing to Christians to liberate the Holy Land. And thus, with Pope Urban II's call to arms, the First Crusade was set into motion. Imagine being a simple peasant, driven by religious fervor, setting off on a campaign you're ill-prepared for. That was the reality for many in the First Crusade. The initial phase of the First Crusade was, in a word, chaotic. Thousands of people, from experienced knights to humble peasants, responded to Pope Urban II's call to arms. They were driven by a potent mix of religious zeal, a thirst for adventure, and the promise of wealth. Yet, for many, this fervor was not matched by experience or preparation. The journey to the east was fraught with hardship. The Crusaders' route took them across vast expanses of unfamiliar terrain, through challenging weather, and into the heart of a hostile land. Many perished along the way, victims not of battle, but of the harsh realities of long-distance travel in the 11th century. They fell prey to disease, hunger, and the unforgiving elements, their dreams of glory ending in silent, unmarked graves. But it wasn't just the natural world that posed a threat. Local nomadic tribes were less than welcoming to this influx of foreign invaders. Skirmishes broke out, and the Crusaders found themselves fighting not just for the Holy Land, but for their very survival. And yet, despite these challenges, the Crusaders pressed on. They were fueled by an unwavering belief in their holy mission, a belief that helped them overcome the odds. Their journey was not just a physical one, but a spiritual one. It was a test of their faith, their resolve, and their dedication to the cause. Against all odds, the Crusaders reached the east, ready for battle. They were bruised and battered, their numbers reduced, but their spirits were unbroken. They had survived the chaos of the Crusade's first phase, and now they stood on the brink of the real fight, the battle for the Holy Land. The trials they had faced were but a prelude to the struggles yet to come. Their journey had just begun. Now imagine standing before the walls of the Holy City, knowing the battle of your life awaits. That was the Crusaders' reality in 1099. These were men who had traveled thousands of miles, overcome countless hardships, and faced a myriad of enemies. Their destination, Jerusalem, their aim, to reclaim it from Muslim rule. The Crusaders arrived at the gates of Jerusalem in June 1099, a force of tens of thousands, determined and driven by a divine purpose. But the city was not undefended. The Fatimid Muslims, who controlled Jerusalem, were prepared for the siege. The Crusaders found themselves facing formidable walls and a determined enemy. The siege began. The Crusaders, despite their numbers, were ill-prepared. They lacked necessary siege equipment and suffered from a scarcity of water. Yet, they persevered. The Crusaders constructed two massive siege towers, a feat of engineering that allowed them to breach the city walls. The battle was fierce and brutal. Under the scorching sun, the Crusaders fought with a religious fervor, believing they were chosen by God for this holy mission. The Muslims, on the other hand, were defending their homes, their city, their faith. After weeks of intense fighting, on July 15, 1099, the Crusaders finally breached the city walls and entered Jerusalem. What followed was a bloodbath. The Crusaders, in their zeal, showed no mercy. Men, women, and children, Muslim and Judean alike, were slaughtered. It was a grim scene, a stark contrast to the holy mission the Crusaders claimed to uphold. Despite the brutality, for the Crusaders, the capture of Jerusalem was a moment of triumph. They had achieved what they set out to do. They had taken the holy city, but this was not the end. Their journey was far from over. The Crusaders' victory in Jerusalem marked the beginning of a new chapter in the history of the Crusades, a chapter filled with challenges, conflicts, and contradictions. In a bloodbath, Jerusalem was captured, but the Crusaders' journey was far from over. For the Crusaders, the real struggle was just beginning. The First Crusade was a success, but it opened a Pandora's box of issues that would reverberate through the centuries. With Jerusalem in their hands, the Crusaders had achieved their goal, but what came next? The success of the First Crusade was indeed a significant turning point, but it was merely the beginning of a new chapter. The Crusaders, now victors, found themselves in control of a land far from their homes. To maintain their grip, they began to establish the so-called Latin kingdoms in the East. These were large states controlled by the Crusaders themselves, fortresses of Christianity in a land predominantly Muslim. The most famous of these Latin kingdoms was the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the crown jewel of the Crusaders' conquest. It was a symbol of their triumph, a testament to their power and a sanctuary for Christian pilgrims. Yet, these Latin kingdoms were not merely military outposts. They became centers of cultural exchange, places where East and West met, clashed, and eventually learned from each other. But the Crusaders' success had another, perhaps more profound consequence. The Church, which had instigated the Crusade, found itself in an unprecedented position of power. The triumph of the Crusaders was, in many ways, the triumph of the Church. Pope Urban II, who had called for the Crusade, saw his influence expand dramatically. His vision of a unified Christendom, a Europe united under the banner of the Church, seemed closer to reality. The Church's power was not merely spiritual anymore, it was political, military, and even economic. The Crusades, particularly the First Crusade, allowed the Church to consolidate its grip over Europe. It was not just about the liberation of the Holy Land anymore, it was about shaping the future of Europe and, by extension, the world. So, the aftermath of the First Crusade was a time of transformation. Jerusalem was in the hands of the Crusaders, the Latin kingdoms were established, and the Church had consolidated its power. Yet these changes were not without their challenges. The Crusaders had to defend their new territories, manage their relationship with the local populations, and navigate the complex politics of the Middle East. The First Crusade was a success, but it left a complex legacy in its wake. The echoes of the First Crusade resonate through history, shaping centuries of conflict and cultural exchange. As the dust settled on the victorious Crusaders, the long-term consequences began to emerge, a complex tapestry of conflict and cooperation, brutality and beauty. The First Crusade, while a military success for the Crusaders, sowed seeds of sectarian conflict that would sprout and grow for centuries. The brutalities committed during the siege of Jerusalem, particularly the massacre of its Muslim and Jewish inhabitants, sparked a flame of hatred that would ignite countless battles in the years to come. This religious fanaticism, fueled by the fervor of the Crusade, would intensify, creating a chasm between Christians and Muslims that would echo throughout the Middle Ages. Yet the Crusades were not just a tale of bloodshed and battle. They also set the stage for a significant cultural exchange between the East and the West. As Crusaders journeyed to the Holy Land, they brought back with them new ideas, technologies, and products. The influence of the Islamic world began to seep into Europe, leading to advancements in fields such as medicine, astronomy, and architecture. The Crusades also stimulated trade, as the need for supplies and luxuries from the East created new commercial opportunities and trade routes. But let's not forget the consolidation of the Church's power in Europe. The Crusades gave the Roman Church a common cause to rally around, strengthening its influence and control over the European populace. This authority allowed the Church to shape European society and politics for centuries to come. So as we look back on the First Crusade, we see a complex web of consequences. It was a catalyst for religious fanaticism and sectarian conflict, yet it also sparked cultural exchange and technological advancement. It strengthened the Church's power, but left a legacy of hatred and division. The First Crusade, a turning point in history, was a catalyst for change, both positive and negative. From the ashes of war rose a new world, forever marked by the echoes of the Crusade. So, we return to our initial question: what if one man's decision could alter the course of history? The First Crusade, triggered by Pope Urban II's call to arms, is a striking testament to this idea. A movement born of religious fervor, political ambition, and chivalrous ideals, it marked a significant shift in the dynamics of East and West. From the chaotic beginnings, the arduous journey of peasants and knights alike, to the bloody siege of Jerusalem, this was a saga of faith and power. The Crusaders' victory, while momentous, bore a tangled aftermath. The establishment of Latin kingdoms in the East and the consolidation of church power in Europe were milestones, yet the struggle for the Holy Land was far from over. This crusade sowed seeds of sectarian conflict and fostered cultural exchange, a duality that continues to shape our world. The First Crusade, a pivotal moment in history, continues to influence our world today, reminding us of the power of decisions and the ripple effects they can have.
That's a wrap for today, folks. If you enjoyed, tap that like button. Don't miss out on the fun. Subscribe to stay tuned. The excitement is just beginning.